if you went back 500 years or 700 years ago or 100 years ago, they wouldn't be able to describe what we know now as far as some of the chemical reactions in my brain when I pet a dog, and some of the chemical reactions in a dog's brain when it gets petted, and that kind of stuff. And we know that stuff now, but it was inherent in that relationship. It was understood for centuries without having to be defined. Now we can define it and say, hey, this is what's going on here. And yet we still kind of got to look backwards and go, okay, what are we dealing with in society? What are these diseases of civilization that we're dealing with? How are the ways that on an individual basis or a small community basis we can remedy some of this stuff, or at least start to right the ship? And it seems crazy, but working with dogs is doing it there. There's a lesson there.
I agree with you, Tony. It is. And I think what it does is, when you work with animals, first of all, you have to be present, right? It's like you can't be on your phone or, working on your computer. You have to be present, and it makes you more aware of what's going around you. I mean, and I think this is more challenging in an urban/suburban environment. But, when rural areas, we're used to looking at the sky and seeing what the weather's going to be and trying to figure out how we should dress and do things. We realize how big an impact the environment has on us. And I think a lot of this is just being more in touch with who you are. And that's something that we kind of lose out on, I think, a little bit if we get too much into, the electronics that kind of are running our lives right now. And dogs help pull us out of that. They help, a dog, you're never going to see a dog whip a phone out of their pocket and say, just a minute, I got to text my buddy here. The dog wants to interact with you, and they get a ton of if you want to call it happiness, however you want to describe it, but they get a ton of what makes them, feel good and gives them a reward out of being interactive. I mean, that's how they're hardwired to do that. And we actually, I think, are hardwired to do it with them. Mm-hmm. I really do. I mean, if you want to go back to an evolutionary point of view, it wasn't very long after we became what we now call human, that we brought dogs into the fold. And it's really interesting because, you were talking about the Mongolian stuff. You can look at dog genetics too, and they have a very different set of genes that code for the digestion of carbohydrates, which is not very much of a normal part of a wild dog, like a wolf's diet, right? But our domestic dogs have, in their salivary glands and in their pancreas and lining their intestinal tract, they've got 6 or 7 more sets of digestive enzymes to help digest carbohydrates as a direct result of selection, because they joined us and we were beginning to become farmers. And so they actually are pretty good at digesting grains and things like that. Whereas wolves are not, so it's been a long evolutionary chain, and that's just a physiological example. There's, of course, a whole lot of behavioral examples too. But we have quite a history together, and I think we are really hardwired. They helped do so many things for us. That's why we brought them in, protection, warmth, transportation, all these things, hunting, providing resources for us.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing when you start digging into, what humans were doing here maybe 10,000, 15,000 years ago, and how they were, there's mass kill sites of certain animals, and how you just think about, like, we've had a bunch of guests talk about their, kind of their theories on how we co-evolved or how wolves came to be, a part of our life. And you just can't divorce it from the fact that we at certain points in history figured out how to kill a lot of animals at one time, and that was going to attract dogs, to attract canines. But that genetic lesson there, or the example you just gave of the carbohydrates and the ability to handle it, that's something that I don't think a lot of people understand. And I think there's a lot of, I really want you to address that, because I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. People will see corn used in dog food and go, well, dogs don't eat corn. And then but when you sit out there and watch coyotes go through the woods, and you watch them eat an apple, and they eat grasshoppers, and then they eat a rabbit, and then now when you saying that about, in the last however many thousands of years, they've developed the ability to utilize that food source because of us.
Because they live Yes, right. And the dogs that were able to do that type of thing thrived more, particularly in agriculturally based cultures. So about the time we started depending on agriculture as at least part of our livelihood, that's when domestication really took off. People think it was, when we were more of the hunter-gatherer type, and certainly there was some domestication there. But in terms of diversity of breeds and different functions, that it was the agricultural part that really developed that. And there are several really wonderful papers, both from a highly technical looking at the genes point of view, but also from an anthropology looking at the relationship between dogs and people and why this happened. And getting back to what you said, and I don't want to get on a pedestal here, but that whole concept of grain-free diets is really more of a marketing thing than anything else, because there are people certainly that have allergies to the proteins we find in grains, so that need gluten-free diets but there are only one or two very rare lines of dogs that have actually been demonstrated to have that issue. By and large, most dogs digest starches if they're cooked well, very, very well, and don't have problems with gluten. So, there's the breeds where it's been demonstrated in, and these aren't all the dogs in that breed. Certain lines of Irish setters are kind of the classic example of the dogs that have a celiac-like disease.
Where's that come from?
It's just a genetic mutation that they lost the ability to digest it. And it's in that line of Irish setters. It's not in all Irish setters. But, my point is that for most dogs, we obviously want them to feed, always want a balanced diet, but well-cooked grains is actually fine. It's something they're well adapted to. And you've probably seen the problems that have been associated with grain-free diets over the last few years causing heart disease. So sometimes when we mess with something, we don't always make it better.
Well, yeah. And, the takeaway there is we kind of like to, as in society, we kind of like to talk about dogs like, oh, this guy was a wolf not long ago. Well, it was a long time ago. And
it was a long time ago. You're right.
Yeah. And they're not wolves.
No, they're not. They're dogs, and they're wonderful. Wolves are wonderful too, but I wouldn't want one living in my house.
No, they're different. They're just different things now. When you say that about the genetic variations that have come along with this coexisting with humans, the symbiotic relationship we have, and that their ability to digest carbohydrates, knowing what we know about coyotes and how they've expanded from the Southwest, and now they're adapting very well to not only suburban environments but urban environments. Do you think we're going to see something with them? Obviously you and I will probably be dead by the time this happens, but
I wouldn't be surprised at all. And it may not be. It could be within our lifetime, because the thing about adaptations like that, there are mutations that are happening all the time, and all it takes is for one of those mutations to lend an advantage, and then that animal's going to their offspring are going to have an advantage that allow them to compete better than others. So it could happen very quickly because they have a pretty short reproductive cycle. And coyotes are amazing. They're super smart. It'd be really interesting to look at like urban coyotes versus ones that are in really remote areas, and also compare them to these studies that were done between wolves and domestic dogs, because you might find that they lie somewhere in between.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it makes me think. We just had this woman, Amritha Mallikarjun is her name, and she studies how dogs hear, or how canines hear, and in what types of environments do they hear best, and how do they pick out certain inflections in your voice and that kind of stuff. And that's kind of her area of expertise. And I've heard stories about canine researchers with watching coyotes in urban environments and how they, they'll stand in the bushes by the edge of a highway and listen to the traffic, and the ears are moving, and they know how to listen to that environment and go, now I can cross. And I just wonder if you're going to see all kinds of adaptations with them going from, in their history, it wasn't that long ago where you found them mostly in Southwest in the deserts kind of area. Now they're all over the place because we pushed them out trying to kill them. And now they're living in places where you would think there'd have to be like some real, adaptive advantages coming just from the variety of environments.
Yeah, and I think some of that will be genetic for sure, but some of it will be learned or environmentally based changes. Yeah, coyotes are incredibly adaptive. I mean, they really, really are. I'm really impressed with what I've seen them do, and we have them here in Alaska too. So they're fun to watch.
Is it have they always been in Alaska? They haven't, right?
I'm not sure about that. I mean, I'd have to check. I'm not sure. But for years they used to call them brush wolves.
Yep.
But they're not wolves.
No, they do a really good job of surviving. They
thrive in almost any environment. They're really good at adapting, and I think it's almost easier for them a lot of times to live in suburban and urban areas because once they figure out the food sources, it's actually probably easier for them to get food in those kind of areas.
Yep, that's one thing I hope about. Just this phase we're in with society and general knowledge right now, with dogs, with ourselves, with everything, is we can sit here and look at, where does my dog food come from? Like what goes into creating that? This salmon I buy at the grocery store, where did this come from? And what are they like? I hope we just pay attention better to all of this stuff and go, like you said, just be a little bit more responsible, a little bit more aware of what's going on in the world and how we can make it a little bit better.
Yeah, little changes add up to a lot. I can tell you, from the Purina point of view, I worked with them for a long time. They look at the sustainability of all the food sources that they use and try to be as both economically and environmentally sound as they can. And they have opportunities to go for lower cost ingredients or things like that. And they always try to go for the sustainable ones, particularly when it comes to things like resources like salmon or things that come out of the ocean and things like that. So, yeah, I'm with you on that. But I think that it's going to be our younger generations that can make these changes. We can help them learn about things, but they're going to be the ones that are probably leading the way.
Yeah. Well, and this is, that point there with, I did an article for Wildfall magazine a couple of years ago on that sustainability initiative at Purina. And the one thing that we're sort of having reinforced to us is you get what you pay for. And so we like cheap Chinese goods for a long time. And now we're going, maybe we should be manufacturing some of our medicine here. Maybe some of our, we should be bringing some of this stuff back. And if we have to pay a little more for it, maybe we can sleep a little better at night. And we're just getting a lot of lessons out of this. I know we veered way off course a whole bunch of times here. I knew we would. I want to bring this back around and wrap this up with you, Arleigh. In the world of dogs and all you've studied and all you know about it, what's the one question you hope gets answered about, dog behavior, dog nutrition? There's some question you've got about what, that you've thought, some theory or something. What's one thing you hope gets answered before you're pushing up daisies? The one thing you finally can go, that's right, or that's wrong, or I always thought that.
Man, that's a tough one because, never run out of questions that you want to ask.
How about top three then?
Well, one of the things that we've been working on a lot lately is to try to help their immune system work better from the time they're puppies all the way through, because we think that that'll lead to a longer, healthier life. Mm-hmm. And to do it in a natural way, not just with drugs or anything like that, but to actually understand how their immune system works. And when you do that, the other big thing that you have to pull in with that is how their microbiome works. All the bacteria in their body, particularly in their intestinal tract, it's such a complicated ecosystem in and of itself, but it directs their behavior. It directs their body weight. It directs their immune system. And of course, it directs their digestion and absorption. And there's so many things that it has even their skin, and it has such a huge impact on. So getting a better handle on that and how we can help the dogs keep that stable and structured in a way that promotes a healthy, long life. I mean, I think one of the things we would all love to see, the biggest problem with dogs is they don't live long enough, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you get so attached to them, we have this perfect dog that does everything, and then they pass. And I'd love to find ways to keep them healthier and not just prolong their life, but keep them healthier longer into life so that we get as many great days out of them as we can.